The morning light filtered through the soaring glass walls of San Francisco International Airport, casting long, golden ribbons across the polished terrazzo floor. 4-year-old Liam Patel hopped from one foot to the other, his small hand tucked snugly in the glove of Miss Ellen Taylor, his guardian. He pressed his face to the floor-to-ceiling windows, eyes wide with wonder, as he caught the glimpse of a gleaming SkyVista Airbus A350 waiting at gate C-17. To Liam, first class wasn't just a fancy label. It was a secret world he'd only ever seen in pictures and Dad's stories. A place where clouds felt soft enough to rest your head on, and every seat came with a personal server at the ready. "Almost there, buddy," Ms. Ellen said, her voice warm and calm. She knelt beside him, smoothing the pleat of his navy mule slacks, and glancing at the artfully folded platinum boarding pass tucked in his pocket. "Ready to show your drawing to Daddy?" Liam nodded so vigorously his pigtail bobbed. In his free hand he clutched the carefully wrapped Sketch A, a colorful rendering of a SkyVista jet soaring over a cotton candy sunset. Underneath, in bold crayon letters, he'd written, "Have a safe flight, Daddy." He'd stayed up late finishing it, and his heart swelled at the thought of seeing his father's proud smile when he handed it over in person. That was the plan. Board the plane, settle into his very own suite, hand Dad the drawing, squeeze him tight, and watch him beam. They reached the boarding door. A uniformed attendant saluted Ms. Ellen with a crisp nod. "Ms. Taylor and young Master Patel, welcome aboard first class." Her words were polite, but her tone remained just polite enough. As the door slid open, Liam's imagination surged. He pictured a cloud-white carpet leading to infinite comfort, a world he was about to step into. Inside, the cabin felt hushed and sacred. Plush leather suites curved around small, glossy tables set with silver-rimmed water glasses and monogrammed linens. Pale oak panels gleamed under soft accent lighting, and overhead bins disappeared smoothly into the ceiling, as if the plane had swallowed its own storage. The air smelled faintly of spiced citrus. Every detail whispered luxury. Every corner invited calm. Liam's breath caught. His little heart thumped with a mix of excitement and nerves. He glanced back at Ms. Ellen, who offered him an encouraging smile. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward. They paused just beyond the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin. A tall woman in a crisp navy blazer stood by the console, her posture perfect, her arms folded. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her lips held a pinched, professional smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. She watched Liam's approach with a cool, measured gaze. Liam shifted from one foot to the other, clutching his drawing to his chest as though it were a shield. Ms. Ellen set down their small carry-on and knelt to help Liam with his light backpack. "Go on, sweetheart," she whispered. "Seat 1A is right this way." "Good morning," Liam chirped, his voice high and bright. He held out his drawing with both hands. "I made this for my dad." The flight attendant's lips tightened. Instead of stepping forward, she merely inclined her head in a nod, an acknowledgement so minimal it almost felt dismissive. She turned her back and made a precise motion toward the aisle. "Please, follow me," she said, in a voice so cool it sent a shiver through the air. There was no welcome, no sparkle in her tone, just a directive delivered without warmth. Liam's smile faltered. He peered around her into the suite beyond. A sleek cream leather seat with a fold-out ottoman, a plush pillow embroidered with the SkyVista logo, and an entertainment screen the size of a tablet. It looked like a treasure chest waiting to be opened. Instead, the door to that private haven felt suddenly out of reach. He looked back at Ms. Ellen. Her eyes were quiet with understanding. She gave him a gentle nod and brushed a stray curl from his forehead. "It's okay," she murmured, her fingers warm against his cheek. "We've earned every bit of this. Let's go show him that special drawing." Liam gulped and followed the attendant down the aisle, his tiny steps echoing on the soft carpet. With each footfall, his excitement mingled with a flicker of anxiety. Why hadn't the attendant simply smiled? Why hadn't she said, "Congratulations, Master Patel"? He glanced at his boarding pass in his hand, a platinum card that meant he and his drawing belonged here, just as much as any billionaire or diplomat. He clutched it tighter. At the far end of the suite, the attendant paused. She turned, still frigid, and produced a subtle wave of her hand. "Seat 1A, she instructed. "Enjoy your flight." Without another word, she slipped away to attend to other passengers. Liam crossed to the seat, his heart thundering. He settled in, pressing his drawing onto the small table. It sat there, bright and defiant against the leather and wood. He sat down, hesitated, then tapped his foot once, twice, before pressing his nose to the sketch, inhaling the promise it held. Miss Ellen placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Just wait," she whispered, and gave him a small, conspiratorial smile that promised everything would be all right. Liam nodded and exhaled. The cabin lights dimmed just a notch, and somewhere beyond the curtain, engines rumbled in anticipation. In that hushed moment, he closed his eyes and imagined his father's face lighting up when he finally saw the drawing. A single thought pulsed through Liam's mind. "This is my moment. Daddy will see me." Liam tucked his legs beneath him in the cream leather suite, pressing the drawing flat against his lap. He watched Ms. Ellen Taylor move quietly down the aisle, offering a gentle nod to passing flight attendants as if she belonged to this rarefied world. From his vantage point, Liam could see just enough of her steady composure. Soft gray cardigan, silver hair pulled back in a loose chignon, and kind eyes that never missed a flicker of his expression. He felt simultaneously seen and safe, like the whole cabin existed only to hold this moment until Daddy arrived. At 4 years old, that reassurance meant everything. Ms. Ellen returned with a small tray, a juice box in a frosted glass, and a neatly folded blanket. She set them by Liam's side and settled into the ottoman beside him. "Here you go," she whispered, offering him the drink. "SkyVista's apple juice tastes almost as good as your homemade smoothies." Her words were warm, the kind of gentle teasing that made Liam grin despite the earlier sting of being dismissed. As he raised the straw to his lips, he felt a flutter of comfort. Mrs. Ellen always knew how to turn a moment around. Across the aisle, the flight attendant who had shown such disdain stood by the entry console, arms crossed and gaze fixed on their cabin like a sentry protecting some sacred boundary. This was Sandra Whitmore, age 38, a veteran of SkyVista's first-class service. Liam had overheard Ms. Ellen mention her name once. "She's one of the most experienced attendants we have," but it was clear Sandra's expertise came with an iron-fisted approach. Her pinafore was immaculate, her badge gleamed, and her posture was so rigid it seemed she wore discipline as armor. Liam studied Sandra without moving his head. There was a quiet intensity about her, an unspoken rule that children shouldn't exist in this hushed sanctuary. Most grown-ups find ways to soften their stance when a 4-year-old is involved, but Sandra's expression never wavered. She seemed to believe that the sleek hush of first class demanded a kind of perfection that left no room for crayons or giggles. Liam felt a tiny pang of defiance bubble up. He reminded himself he was here on lifetime seat 1A, and no amount of icy scowls could change that fact. Leaning closer, Ms. Ellen asked, "Do you remember how Dad described this cabin, Liam?" She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, her touch as calming as a lullaby. Liam nodded, eyes brightening. "He said it's like a palace in the sky, and everyone inside should feel like royalty." He pressed his thumb to the edge of the sketch taped to his lap. "I wanted him to see my picture right away. His voice trembled just a touch, and Ms. Ellen's gentle smile widened. "Your drawing is perfect," she said, smoothing the paper so the crease lay flat. "Your dad will love it." Her words felt like a shield against the earlier coldness, and Liam exhaled. He marveled at how Miss Ellen seemed to know exactly when to step in with comfort, never pushing or fussing, just being there. A steady presence in a sea of formality. At that moment, the cabin felt less like a luxury showroom and more like a room waiting for a family reunion. Sandra Whitmore glided down the aisle, offering whispered greetings to passengers in rows 1 and 2. Her lips curved into a practiced smile as she passed silver-rimmed water glasses and monogrammed napkins with silent precision. But each time she glanced toward Liam's seat, her smile froze. He caught the smallest flicker of surprise in her copper-brown eyes, and then she brushed it away, masking it beneath a veneer of efficiency. Even from 4 rows back, Liam sensed that she was calculating something, as though a question had clicked into place behind her gaze. As the seatbelt signs flickered off, a hush settled over first class. Ms. Ellen leaned in and whispered, "I want you to remember how brave you are, okay? Your dad will be so proud of you." Liam nodded, his heart swelling. He glanced toward the curtain leading to business class, where the rest of the cabin hummed with travelers settling in, but his eyes returned to the drawing, to the front door where his father would soon step through, and to the attendant, whose every move he now watched with newfound curiosity. In that gentle lull, Liam felt the full weight of this moment, a mix of excitement, anxiety, and that quiet flame of hope that only a 4-year-old can carry so bravely. Liam settled deeper into the plush leather of his first-class suite, clutching his hand-drawn picture to his chest. The cabin had fallen into a soft hush now that the seatbelt signs were off, and the gentle hum of the engines felt like a lullaby under the muted overhead lights as he studied the cloud-scrawled horizon outside his window. His small fingers reflexively probed the pocket of his jacket and came across something unexpected. A tiny wooden airplane, varnished smooth by countless flights. Ms. Ellen had slipped it into his pocket before boarding. "His favorite fidget toy," she'd whispered, "just in case you need something to keep busy." With a shy smile, Liam lifted the plane onto his lap. He turned its wings between his fingers, imagining it skipping through the air above the clouds. He tapped one wing against his knee, tick-tick, just enough sound to remind him it was real. The toy's presence felt comforting, a tangible piece of home amid the luxury of SkyVista's first-class cabin. He placed it on the fold-out table beside his drawing, ready to reach for it whenever his mind drifted. Across the aisle, Sandra Whitmore stood near the galley entrance, arms folded in that authoritative stance he'd noticed earlier. She was the picture of composure in her Navy uniform, crisp collar, pressed skirt, and the polished wing badge that marked her as a senior attendant. But there was something hard-edged about her posture, a sense that she saw playthings as intrusions on her meticulously ordered domain. Every time she passed by, her gaze flicked toward Liam, measuring him with cool precision. Liam glanced up and gave her a tentative wave, not expecting her to return it but hoping for a flicker of kindness. Instead, Sandra's lips pressed into a thin line and she returned to her post without a word. The moment her back was turned, he relaxed and picked up the wooden plane again, this time placing it on the armrest and letting his thumb drift along the grain. The soft click of wood on leather was barely audible, but in the hush of the cabin, it felt surprisingly loud. He tried to be quiet. He really did. But when he nudged the plane to make it zoom along the armrest, the wood tapped sharply enough to echo inside his ears. His chest tightened with embarrassment. But he couldn't help himself. Liam was 4 years old. He needed something to do with his hands, and this plane was the perfect antidote to his nerves. Suddenly, Sandra's voice cut through the calm like a brisk wind. "Excuse me, young man," she said, stepping into Liam's sightline. Her tone was polite but brittle, as though the word young itself was an annoyance. "This is first class. It's supposed to be a quiet environment." She bent slightly at the waist to address him eye to eye, her expression unreadable. Liam's heart thudded so loudly he was sure she could hear it. He opened his mouth to apologize, but no words came out. The wooden plane lay forgotten in his hand, a simple toy that had become a symbol of his transgression. Sandra reached forward, pinched the fuselage between her fingertips, and yanked it away from him in one swift motion. The plane bounced off his palm and clattered onto the aisle carpet. Liam's breath caught and his stomach lurched. He felt like a bird whose wings had been snatched away. Sandra's gaze hardened. "Please keep all toys and devices stowed for the duration of the flight," she instructed, her voice low and final. Without waiting for his reply, she spun on her heel and marched back toward the galley. Her heels clicked on the aisle carpet in a cadence that sounded accusing. The silence she left in her wake was heavier than any word she could have spoken. Liam remained frozen, staring at the spot where the plane had fallen. Around him, other passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. A woman 2 rows back glanced over with sympathetic eyes, then quickly looked away, as though checking her phone for distraction. No one offered to pick up the toy. No one spoke up on his behalf. The world felt suddenly colder. Ms. Ellen was at his side in an instant, kneeling beside him as the flight attendant finished her rounds. She scooped the wooden plane into her hand and tucked it into her own bag out of harm's way. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Her voice was a warm blanket, wrapping around his shoulders. "Let's just focus on the drawing, okay? Your dad will be here soon." Liam swallowed hard, nodding into her cardigan. He turned his eyes back to his sketch and traced the bright strokes of crayon with a trembling finger. In that quiet moment, he realized something that children don't often face so early, that the rules of the grown-up world could sometimes feel unfair, even cruel. But Miss Ellen's gentle presence reminded him that he wasn't alone. He pressed the drawing flat on the table and took a deep breath. The cabin lights above him glowed softly, as though urging him to hold on a little longer. And somewhere behind the curtain, somewhere beyond that hush, his father was preparing to step into this very moment. Liam didn't yet know how or when, but in his small heart, a spark of hope ignited. That soon, everything would start to feel right again. In the stillness of first class, Liam learned his first real lesson about the shadow that can follow power, a lesson he would never forget. The cabin lights glowed softly as the seatbelt signs clicked off, and a hush settled over first class, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional murmur of a passenger settling into their own suite. 4-year-old Liam Patel pressed both hands against his lap, holding his now fragile drawing close. He glanced at Ms. Ellen Taylor, who sat attentively in the ottoman beside him, and tried to swallow the lump forming in his throat. Everything had felt so perfect back at the gate. Until now. Across the aisle, Sandra Whitmore stood at rigid attention, her posture as unyielding as the steel in her name tag. She folded her arms, watched the cabin with those sharp, copper-brown eyes, and cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she called, her voice low but carrying. "Children under 6 are not permitted in first class." Her tone was polite, almost clinical, but to Liam, it sounded like a verdict. His stomach flipped. He looked down at his little hands, clad in his navy blazer sleeves, and then back at the drawing splayed across his lap. "But I'm allowed," he managed, his voice trembling. "Daddy gave me this seat." He tapped the edge of his platinum boarding pass, where Liam A. Patel, Lifetime Seat 1A, gleamed in embossed letters. Sandra's lips curved into a thin line. "Those privileges," she replied, "apply to adults and their companions. A 4-year-old is neither." She stepped forward, her polished shoes clicking on the carpet. please? Collect your belongings and move to business class." Liam's chest felt as if someone had squeezed it too tight. "I don't want to go," he whispered, his eyes welling with tears. He pressed his drawing against his chest, as if it could shield him from her words. Ms. Ellen stood swiftly, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sandro, he has every right to be here," she said firmly. "He's Mr. Patel's son. Please reconsider." Her voice was calm but carried an undeniable authority, the same quiet strength that Liam relied on. Sandra's gaze flicked to Ms. Ellen, then back to Liam. "Company policy," she repeated, almost as if that single phrase were enough to end the argument. She reached out and, without a word, snatched the drawing from Liam's lap. The paper crinkled sharply as her fingers closed around it. "Give that back!" Liam whimpered, lunging forward. He stumbled over the love seat's edge and bumped into the armrest, his small body skidding against the leather. The drawing slipped from Sandra's grasp as if it had been too delicate to hold. It fluttered to the floor between them, colors splattering in a small, heartbreaking rainbow. A stunned hush fell over the cabin. A glass-topped side table clinked when a man in a pinstriped suit dropped his magazine, eyes wide. A woman just beyond them pressed a tissue to her lips, her cheeks paling. No one moved to help. No one spoke. In that moment, Liam felt utterly alone. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he blinked hard. "I'm sorry," he gasped, as if the apology might erase what had just happened. His voice cracked, and he tried to stand, but his legs refused to hold him steady. Ms. Ellen crouched beside him, wrapping an arm around his waist and pulling him close. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, brushing his hair away from his face. "I've got you." She scooped him into her arms and carried him away from the scene, cradling him like a mother might. The soft rustle of her cardigan was the only sound for a moment. As they retreated toward the business class curtain, Sandra stood silently, her expression unreadable, eyes cast downward. She didn't reach for them, didn't say another word. It was as though she had delivered her judgment and found her powers exhausted. Once they were just beyond the curtain's edge, Miss Ellen sat Liam in the nearest seat. It was narrower, less luxurious than 1A, but for now, it was a refuge. She rocked him gently, murmuring, "I'm so sorry, Liam. That wasn't right." She opened her tote bag and produced a fresh sheet of paper and a small box of crayons. "Here, let's draw something new together." Liam wiped his eyes on his sleeve and stared at the crayons. The colors seemed too bright, too cheerful, after what had just happened. He shook his head and buried his face against Ms. Ellen's shoulder. "I don't want to draw," he whispered. I just want Daddy." Miss Ellen's voice cracked on her next breath. She tightened her arms around him. "I know, baby. I know." She stroked his back, humming quietly, as though soothing him might mend his broken heart. Behind them, the cabin resumed its rhythm. The flight attendants resumed their gentle service, offering champagne and caviar plates as though nothing had happened. The engines droned on, unwavering as though they, too, refused to acknowledge the hurt of a 4-year-old boy. Liam blinked up at Ms. Ellen, his lower lip trembling. "Will Daddy know?" he asked, voice muffled in her sweater. "Will," she vowed, her tone hushed but resolute. "He's going to make sure this never happens again." She brushed away a tear that had slipped down his cheek. "Until then, you and I are safe here. And I'll be right here with you the whole time." He nodded slowly, wrapping his arms around her neck. The crayons on the tray table caught the soft overhead light, reminding him of promise and possibility. He squeezed his eyes shut and took a shaky breath. He might be small, but in that moment, he felt the ember of hope flicker back to life. Because even in the coldest cabin, a gentle heart can still find warmth. And even the youngest among us can still believe that love will come. Liam sat curled into the narrower leather seat of business class, his small body still trembling from the shock of having his drawing torn and being yanked out of first. The cabin around him was quieter here, gentler lighting, softer seats, but none of it could erase the sting of humiliation. He pressed the torn remnants of his artwork against his chest, eyes cast down at the patterned carpet, as Ms. Ellen Taylor knelt beside him, her hand warm and reassuring on his back. "I know it hurts, sweet pea," she murmured, her voice low enough so only Liam could hear. "But Daddy gave you something more powerful than any drawing." She reached into her tote and pulled out a slim, rectangular object wrapped in a soft velvet pouch. Liam's breath caught when she peeled back the fabric to reveal the platinum boarding pass, his lifetime seat 1A, etched in elegant block letters. Liam A. Patel, SkyVista Royal Access. His heart thudded. This wasn't just a ticket, it was a symbol of his father's unspoken promise that Liam belonged exactly where he was. He lifted the card with trembling fingers and traced the initials LAP with his thumb. Memories of bedtime stories flooded back, of his dad describing first class as our family's promise in the clouds. For the first time since Sandra's cruel outburst, Liam felt a surge of quiet hope. Ms. Ellen watched his eyes light up. "Your father knows exactly where you are," she said, voice firm and calm. She pulled a sleek smartphone from her pocket and tapped the screen, opening a secure messaging app. Liam peered over to see her fingers fly across the display, sending a single sentence. "Incident on 4626. Toddler assaulted. Lifetime seat 1A involved. Please advise override." A moment later, her phone pinged with a brief acknowledgement. "Received. Stand by." Liam's small shoulders relaxed as he sensed the gears turning behind the scenes. The phone ping felt like a secret handshake between adults in the know, an unspoken assurance that help was on the way. He gripped the boarding pass tighter, as if drawing power from its weight. The world felt less cold now, because he knew his father was listening. Around them, business class passengers whispered quietly in pairs, some exchanging glances of sympathy. A flight attendant paused at the galley and offered a gentle smile when she saw Liam clutching his ticket. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she whispered before hurrying off. It was a small kindness, but to Liam it shimmered like a beacon. He tucked the boarding pass back into his jacket pocket, next to the torn drawing fragments he dared not show again. Ms. Ellen brushed a loose curl from his forehead. "We'll stay calm and wait," she told him softly. "Soon, your seat won't just be a spot on this plane. It will be your voice." Liam nodded, swallowing against the lump in his throat. He felt the warmth of her hand steadying him, and for the first time since boarding, he believed that dignity might find its way back to him. As the engines steadied into their cruising hum, Liam closed his eyes and envisioned his father appearing on one of the seatback screens. Voice calm, eyes proud, making everything right again. The promise of that moment fluttered in his chest like a bird finding its wings. He pressed his palm to the cool metal edge of the ticket in his pocket, feeling the engraved letters press against his skin. Lifetime seat 1A. Ms. Ellen settled beside him, keeping one eye on the curtain leading back to first class. "Whatever happens, remember that you're right where you belong," she whispered, smoothing down the lapels of his little blazer. Liam met her gaze and managed a small, determined nod. The fear that had weighed him down began to lift, replaced by a quiet courage. In the hush of business class, Liam learned his first lesson in silent power. Sometimes the greatest acts of justice start with a single, unbreakable promise. And with his platinum pass safely tucked away and his guardian ready at his side, he knew the real plan had already begun. The engine's rumble shifted as the Airbus began its slow taxi toward the runway. Down the length of the cabin, the gentle glow of reading lights and muted conversation mingled with the soft squeak of wheels on the tarmac. 4-year-old Liam Patel sat tucked into his business class seat, clutching his platinum boarding pass and the torn fragments of his drawing against his chest. He pressed his cheek to the cool window, watching the terminal lights blur by as the world outside slipped past, unaware of the storm still brewing behind him. Beside him, Ms. Ellen Taylor sat forward in her seat, eyes sharp and attentive. She tapped her phone screen once, no visible change, then tucked it away. She wanted to preserve calm for Liam, who was still reeling from Sandra's harsh treatment. But behind her calm exterior, she knew something important was happening. A few rows up, a well-dressed passenger in a charcoal suit lowered his reading glasses and reached for his smartphone. He had watched the earlier scene, Sandra's hand connecting with the side of Liam's tiny wrist, the boy's shocked gasp, the tearing of that precious drawing. Most people had looked away in embarrassment or discomfort, but this passenger, Mr. Reynolds, had seen something he couldn't unsee. An adult abusing a child's innocence in first class. He tapped record, his finger deliberate, and captured every moment in crisp, silent video. The camera followed Sandra's swift motion as she yanked the toy plane, the flutter of the paper, and the look of wide-eyed hurt on Liam's face. He framed Sandra's stern profile against the backdrop of the plush cabin, then panned back to the boy, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. He recorded the full minute, Sandra's clenched jaw, Liam's trembling lips, until the seatbelt sign flickered off. Then Mr. Reynolds stopped the recording and, without hesitation, tapped share. He sent the clip to a single contact in his phone, Arjun Patel. He knew that number by heart, the CEO's direct line, used for emergencies. Mr. Reynolds watched the little delivered check mark appear and offered a small nod to himself, before slipping the phone back into his jacket pocket. At that moment, the entire cabin seemed to pulse. A nervous hush fell over first class. The flight attendants paused in mid-greet as the engines revved louder for takeoff. In business class, Ms. Ellen sensed a subtle shift in the air and placed a comforting hand on Liam's knee. She noticed Mr. Reynolds close his eyes for a heartbeat, then compose himself. She knew what that silence meant. The message had gone through. Liam turned to look at her, frowning as if trying to solve a puzzle too big for his 4-year-old mind. "Miss Ellen?" he whispered, voice small and curious. She smiled gently. "Just a lot of grown-up stuff, honey. Your dad's going to see that video. He cares about you, remember?" The seatbelt signs pinged on again, signaling that the cabin was moments away from departure. The flight attendants moved with renewed purpose, securing galley carts and smoothing napkins on side tables. Passengers straightened in their seats, some peeking at their phones with furrowed brows. The usual pre-fleet bustle carried an extra undercurrent of tension, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. From beneath the curtain that separated first class and business class, a soft chime echoed, a notification on the cabin's in-flight entertainment system. The monitors in every seat flickered momentarily before returning to the familiar SkyVista logo. But Ms. Ellen knew what that chime meant. The override was in progress. Liam looked around the cabin, confusion mingling with anticipation in his big brown eyes. He hugged his platinum pass a little tighter, as though drawing strength from its heft. "Will Daddy really come?" he asked, voice barely above a breath. "She will," Ms. Ellen corrected with a wink, though she meant the CEO's presence would arrive in another form first. "He'll be here when you need him most." The plane lurched forward as it joined the taxiway, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, soft and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 4626 to Miami. We're now taxiing for takeoff. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." As the captain spoke, Mr. Reynolds leaned back in his seat, digging out a pair of noise-canceling headphones but not using them. He kept his eyes fixed on the curtain, as if he could see through it to whatever was happening on the other side. In that silent vigil, he became a sentinel for justice. Up front, Sandra Whitmore adjusted her uniform, her expression unreadable. She glanced toward the curtain, then away, as if sensing an unseen weight pressing down on her. For the first time, she looked uncertain, not because she'd done something wrong, but because she couldn't be sure if someone more powerful was watching. On the seatback screen in Liam's suite, the chime sounded again. This time, the SkyVista logo dissolved into the live video feed of Arjun Patel's office in Palo Alto. He sat behind his sleek desk, shirt sleeves rolled up, eyes calm but steel-sharp. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Silicon Valley skyline. He leaned forward slightly, as though addressing the cabin directly. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen." Arjun's voice filled every speaker. Calm, authoritative, tinged with the quiet power that came from someone who never needed to raise his voice. "I've just received evidence that a young passenger on this flight has been mistreated. Effective immediately, Flight 4626 is being diverted to Los Angeles for a full investigation. The crew member involved will be removed from service upon landing. I apologize for any inconvenience, and thank you for your cooperation." A collective breath seemed to exhale through the cabin. The engine's whine softened at the pilot's response. "Copy that, sir. Diversion to LA confirmed." Passengers exchanged startled looks, then murmured approval. In business class, Ms. Ellen let out a quiet sigh of relief and knelt beside Liam, hugging him close. Liam watched the screen with wide eyes, clutching his ticket. He didn't fully understand the words, but he recognized his father's voice, that same voice that read bedtime stories and taught him to be brave. His small chest filled with warmth. "Daddy's here," he whispered. Ms. Ellen smiled, brushing a tear from her own eye. "He's always here when you need him, sweetheart." As the plane banked gently toward the runway's exit, the cabin's atmosphere crackled with silent vindication. No one cheered, no one clapped. Instead, passengers sat back, shoulders squared, eyes bright with shared understanding. The quietest acts of justice often echoed the loudest. For Liam, the world had shifted. In that moment, he learned that power could be wielded not with anger, but with a single, unwavering promise, and that even a 4-year-old could be held safe by the most unexpected guardians. The cabin settled into a strange stillness after Mr. Patel's message faded from the seatback screens. Engines hummed more quietly, as though listening. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, whispers curling through the rows like a breeze through a silent forest. 4-year-old Liam Patel sat bolt upright in business class, his small hand clutched around the edge of his platinum boarding pass. He felt the soft tremor of the plane's frame under his finger, as if the jet itself were bracing for something new. Mrs. Ellen Taylor remained at his side, her calm presence a lighthouse in the sudden hush. She reached over and gently tapped his knee, offering a smile he could feel in his chest more than see on her lips. Behind her, flight attendants exchanged guarded glances, tucking tablets into leather pouches. One attendant pressed a discreet button on her earpiece. A micro light on her lapel blinked once, then twice, an unspoken signal that a higher order was unfolding. Liam watched the curtain between first and business class flutter slightly, as though the air itself were charged. He pressed his forehead against the curve of the window and peered out at the tarmac lights sliding past. The world beyond the glass looked the same, rows of gates, gleaming jet bridges, night lights, but inside, everything was different. He could almost hear the soft ping of unseen messages racing through the plane's control systems. At that moment, Ms. Ellen's smartwatch chimed, its screen glowing with a single line of text. "Divert to lax crew reassignment imminent." She caught Liam's gaze and blinked once, blinking twice as if to say, "Yes, this is real." Then she slipped the watch face down, covering it with her cuff, and turned to Liam. "Everything's under control," she whispered, her voice steady. "Your dad's orders. We're headed to Los Angeles instead of Miami." Liam's lips parted in a silent O, and he folded the torn drawing fragments back into his jacket pocket. The platinum pass felt heavier now, lined with the weight of his father's promise and the jet's sudden change of course. He looked at Ms. Ellen, questions burning behind his wide eyes. "Why Los Angeles? What happens next?" She offered a gentle shrug. "We'll find out soon," she said. Then, more quietly, "But know this, no one here dares to question your place." Across the aisle, passengers leaned toward their neighbors, murmuring about the diversion and the unexpected order. A businessman in row 3C flipped open his tablet and tapped at an alert. "Flight 4626 diverted per CEO directive." A mother in row 4B wrapped an arm around her daughter, smiling a little too brightly, as though to reassure herself more than the child. Everyone had seen the message. Everyone had felt its weight. Liam felt the gentle upward slope of the runway under the plane's tires as it turned toward the taxiway exit. He gripped the armrest, heart beating a little faster with every foot of motion. Ms. Ellen reached out, brushing his hair back, and asked softly, "You okay, kiddo?" He nodded, though his throat felt tight. He looked at his boarding pass, the letters "Lifetime Seat 1A" glinting in the overhead light. That was his shield. A flight attendant drifted by, lowering the blinds on the windows beyond Liam's seat. She caught his eye, offered a small, sympathetic smile, and then moved on without a word. It was one of those quiet kindnesses that felt enormous in the hush of the cabin. Liam traced the embossed name on his pass with one finger, forging hope from the cool metal beneath his skin. Behind the curtain, the engines surged again as the captain announced over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 4626 will now be diverting to Los Angeles International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We apologize for the inconvenience." His words were polite, clipped, but carried an undercurrent of authority that broke no argument. Liam squeezed Ms. Ellen's hand and tilted his head. "When will Daddy be on the plane?" he asked in a small voice that somehow seemed big against the cabin's hush. She smiled and tucked a stray curl behind his ear. "He's already here," she whispered, nodding toward the screens that now displayed a rerouted flight path. "He's always here where it matters." As the plane lifted into a gentle turn, the cabin lights dimmed another notch, bathing everyone in a soft bluish glow. The mood shifted from anxious to expectant, a collective holding of breath, waiting for the next move in this silent game of power and mercy. In that fragile moment, Liam realized that even though he was small, his father's quiet command had reshaped the very sky around them. And though no one spoke, the tension that had once burned hot in his chest eased into something steadier. The knowledge that sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers through an overhead speaker, flutters on a beam of platinum, and lands softly in the heart of a child. The cabin lights dimmed another notch, an almost imperceptible shift, and every single personal screen flickered, as though winking off in unison. A silent gasp rippled through the rows. Seatback monitors that had been paused on silver-gray Airbus schematics now showed only a locked padlock icon, accompanied by a soft warning chime. 4-year-old Liam Patel sat, jaw slack, clutching his platinum boarding pass so tightly the edges dug into his palm. From the galley's hidden speakers, Arjun Patel's voice emerged. Low, calm, unmistakable, it filled the cabin without raising its volume, sounding more like a quiet certainty than a shout. "The employee who struck my son will not remain on this aircraft," the voice intoned. "Flight 4626 is being diverted to Los Angeles." Further announcements will follow. Liam's eyes flew open. He swallowed around a lump in his throat, then turned his head toward the curtain that separated first class and business class. He could almost see the faint silhouette of Sandra Whitmore beyond that veil, rigid with expectation. He didn't know how his father's words had reached them so quickly, through wires, satellites, magic, but he felt the full weight of that promise settle around him like a warm blanket. The hush that followed was palpable. Not a single passenger stirred. A champagne flute hovered halfway to a pair of lips. A magazine lay open on a lap. Pages paused in mid-turn. Even the overhead bins seemed to hold their breath. It was as if the whole cabin had been reminded that power need not roar to be heard. It simply needs to speak once, with unshakable authority. Ms. Ellen Taylor leaned in, her voice a quiet anchor. "That's him," she whispered. "Your dad just said exactly what he meant." She patted his knee. "You're safe." Liam nodded, his pulse slowing as the initial shock faded into awe. He pressed his forehead against the back of his hand, trying to ground himself in the moment. At 4 years old, he understood only part of it, but he knew this: no more tears, no more shame. His father had shown up for him, not in person, but in every screen and loudspeaker, and that was enough. In the aisle, Sandra Whitmore reeled back, her polished shoes skidding on the carpet. Her laminated ID badge, once a symbol of her pristine uniform, dangled from her lapel like a shackle. She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the nearest flight attendant. I thought... Her voice cracked, the words trailing into the hush. Another attendant, a woman from business class whose name tag read Maria, stepped forward. Her expression was firm but kind. "Mrs. Whitmore, please gather your things," she said quietly. "You'll be escorted off upon landing." Maria's tone carried no malice, only the same businesslike acceptance that had defined the captain's calm announcement. It was justice delivered not with vengeance but with precision. A few passengers exchanged glances, then nodded in approval. One elderly gentleman in seat 2A gave a discreet thumbs up. A mother in row 3 offered a sympathetic smile to Maria as she led Sandra away. No applause filled the cabin. This was not a show. It was the silent unmasking of cruelty, witnessed by everyone, acknowledged by everyone, and then put to rest in a single, unarguable statement of authority. Liam exhaled slowly. He pulled the torn drawing fragments from his jacket pocket and held them out, as if offering them to the air that carried his father's voice. His small fingers brushed the ragged edges, and he bent them gently, pressing the pieces together as though he could mend his own heart that way. Miss Ellen placed a hand on his shoulder. "One day we'll glue it back," she promised. "But for now, let's just be proud of how brave you are." He nodded against her cardigan, eyes full of a new kind of confidence. The cabin lights brightened slightly, as though acknowledging a moment completed. Flight attendants resumed their duties with muted efficiency, polishing silver trays, adjusting pillows, offering warm smiles instead of scowls. The plane's engines hummed as they pivoted toward the runway's exit, ready to chart the new course dictated by a father's love. A gentle tap sounded on each shoulder as a flight attendant passed by with a tray of warm cookies. "Courtesy of Mr. Patel," she murmured. The aroma of chocolate chip and vanilla filled the cabin, sweet and comforting. Liam accepted one with a shy smile and took a careful bite, feeling the warmth spread through him. He glanced at the locked screens one last time. His father's promise still glowed in his mind, that a single voice, spoken with purpose, can shape even the skies. And as the cabin settled into that steady, unspoken solidarity, Liam realized that real power sometimes speaks through silence, and that his own voice, small though it was, mattered to the most important person in the world. For the first time since boarding, he leaned back in his seat and let himself believe in the quiet, reassuring way that only a child can. Completely, without reservation, and with unfettered hope. For a moment, the cabin seemed suspended in time. Engines droned low, the soft whoosh of air vents felt louder than ever, and every sky-high suite was suddenly a spotlight on one small boy. Then, from the galley area that separated first and business class, a crisp, alert tone sounded. A private message routed through SkyVista's secure crew channel. A flight attendant flicked her headset, read the terse directives scrolling across her tablet, and her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Patel's orders," she whispered to the colleague beside her. "Immediately remove Ms. Whitmore from duty. She's to be debriefed and reassigned upon landing." She tapped a reply and tilted her head toward the curtain, where Sandra Whitmore stood, still trembling from the earlier broadcast. It happened in a heartbeat. Words spread down the aisle like wildfire. Passengers who had only moments before been settling into their drinks and digital screens now turned in unison to look at Sandra. A hush fell once again, but this time it carried sharp edges of collective "how could she" imaginations. A pair of executives exchanged a single, pointed nod. A mother bent to whisper to her husband, "No one does that to a little kid." Even the crew in business class paused, tucking away their tablets to watch the fallout. Sandra froze, her posture stiff as a soldier on parade. Her polished badge, once a symbol of rank and pride, caught the ambient light and gleamed like a tarnished metal. She swallowed, lips parting as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, a feeble attempt to brace against the wave of disapproval closing in from every side. Liam watched it all with wide eyes, tucked down low in his business class seat. He hadn't fully understood every word, reassigned, debriefed, but he recognized the shift in atmosphere. He pressed his palm to his platinum boarding pass, feeling the embossed letters under his fingertips. Liam A. Patel, Lifetime Seat 1A. In that instant, he knew he belonged here more than ever. Mrs. Ellen squeezed his shoulder gently. "That's right, Liam," she said softly. "Your father's standing up for you. They know exactly what to do." Her voice was calm, but her eyes sparkled with fierce pride. Liam felt warmth creep through his chest, pushing out the last flecks of fear. A stewardess glided past, offering bottled water with a sympathetic glance at Liam. He managed a tiny, grateful smile and took a careful sip. The cool liquid soothed his throat. It felt like courage in a glass. Behind him, the cabin lights brightened subtly, as though acknowledging the turning of the tide. Up in first class, more passengers craned their necks to catch a glimpse of Sandra as she was quietly led toward the rear exit by two senior attendants. You could taste the relief in the air, like the moment after a storm when the clouds finally break. Children huddled to their parents, some clutching small toys as if in solidarity with the boy whose innocence had been violated. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are coordinating a crew reassignment. Ms. Whitmore will no longer be aboard Flight 4626 upon arrival. We appreciate your patience and apologize for the inconvenience." He paused, then added, "Thank you for your cooperation and understanding." The words were polite, but under them lay a clear message. Cruelty would not stand unchallenged. A ripple of murmured approval spread through the cabin. One elderly gentleman sat forward and tapped his tray table. "Well said," he grumbled, voice low but firm. A businesswoman nearby gave him a quick wink. Liam sat straighter, heart buoyed by the solidarity around him. He glanced at his torn drawing, bits of crayon dust still clinging to the floorboard. He picked up one half of the picture and pressed it to his cheek, imagining that soon he'd see his father's kind eyes when he handed over the restored artwork. Ms. Ellen leaned in again. "Your dad's arranged for a special welcome," she whispered. "He'll meet us on the jetway in Los Angeles. You'll get to give him your drawing then." She pulled out a small, rolled-up blanket from her tote bag and tucked it around Liam's shoulders like the cape of a tiny superhero. "You did great," she added, brushing his hair. Liam nodded, chest swelling with a sense of triumph so quiet it felt like a secret. He could almost hear his father's footsteps approaching through the curtain, hear the low chuckle he'd always get when Liam made something just for him. In that moment, he learned that power sometimes didn't roar, it simply spoke, and the world listened. The cabin lights softened into a cozy glow as Flight 4626 cruised toward its new destination. Passengers returned to their routines, smiling at cabin crew, unwrapping snacks, tapping at tablets. But an undercurrent of connection lingered. They had borne witness to a small child's injustice and joined together to set it right, all without a single raised voice. For Liam, the emotional crescendo had passed into a gentle resolution. He tucked his drawing fragments into a fresh sheet of paper Ms. Ellen handed him and began to trace new lines around the torn edges. Piece by piece, he started to rebuild his gift, his heart lighter than it had been in hours. And as the plane veered west toward the Pacific sunset, Liam closed his eyes and let the quiet power of his father's promise wash over him. He was safe, he was seen, and in that hush of collective approval, he felt for the first time that this sky, no matter how high, was a place he belonged. A steady click echoed through the cabin as the galley curtain was drawn back. 4-year-old Liam Patel sat rigid in his business class seat, clutching his platinum boarding pass in one hand and the frayed corner of his torn drawing in the other. All around him, passengers turned in their seats, eyes fixed on the narrow aisle where 2 senior flight attendants had paused. At their side stood Sandra Whitmore, the once pristine SkyVista first-class attendant, whose polished name tag now seemed to glint with irony. She stood ramrod straight, but trembled, gloved hands folded in front of her skirt. The hush that followed her earlier removal order had deepened into something heavy, an unspoken tension that filled the cabin from bulkhead to wingtip. Then Ms. Ellen Taylor stepped forward. She moved with deliberate calm, a contrast to the storm of anticipation heating the cabin air. In one hand, she held a gleaming silver service tray. On it lay the torn fragments of Liam's carefully crafted drawing. The bright crayon streaks splintered like broken rainbows. The tray caught the soft overhead lights, sending a gentle shimmer across the plush upholstery and through rows of silent witnesses. Passengers leaned forward as though drawn by the sheer gravity of the moment. Even the flight attendants in the back paused in mid-task, polishing glassware, adjusting napkins, eyes flickering toward the assembly at the front. Sandra's lips parted, honed into a sharp line long enough that her mouth seemed unwilling to speak. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. For a moment, the only sound was the muted hum of the air conditioning vents, as if the aircraft itself held its breath. Mrs. Ellen set the tray on the console at the head of the cabin, then turned to face Sandra. Her gaze was steady and compassionate, but something else shone in her eyes, a quiet authority born of every promise she'd made to protect this little boy. "Ms. Whitmore," she began, voice soft but carrying across the aisle, "these remain the only trace of his gift to his father." She gestured to the ragged pieces of paper. "We'll be keeping them on record, along with all other evidence of this incident. You may keep the larger fragments yourself," she said, tilting her head, "so that you never forget what happens when you underestimate a child." Her words were measured, free of anger. Still, they vibed through the cabin like a clarion call for accountability. Sandra's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she blinked away tears she could not hide. She extended one gloved hand with shaking fingers and lifted a single torn corner from the tray, as though handling an artifact too fragile to touch. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of every eye in the cabin. "I didn't know." "You didn't take a moment to find out," Ms. Ellen replied gently. She held Sandra's gaze just long enough for her words to carve themselves into memory. No recrimination, only the quiet power of truth. All at once, the cabin exhaled. A ripple of sympathetic murmurs passed through business and first class alike. A woman in seat 2A dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed napkin. A man in row 1B stepped forward, offering a small nod of respect towards Sandra. An unspoken acknowledgement that everyone makes mistakes, but not everyone faces them. Sandra lowered her head, the last of her defiance folding inward. She tucked the fragment into the palm of her free hand, staring at it as though it contained the sum of her failure. Ms. Ellen folded her hands, the service tray now empty, and placed it gently beside the console. The ritual was complete. Injustice witnessed, acknowledged, and held up for all to see. At that moment, Liam caught sight of his torn drawing, pieces laid bare like a cracked mosaic. He pressed the scraps together, piece by piece, smoothing the edges with his small fingertips. The action felt monumental. It was his silent vow to rebuild what had been broken. Behind him, the cabin lights brightened slightly, as though granting permission for life to move forward. Flight attendants resumed their duties, offering fresh blankets and soft smiles. The engine's constant murmur shifted from tension to a steady assurance, readying for descent. Sandra lifted her head and allowed her gaze to sweep the cabin, meeting the eyes of passengers who had once watched in polite detachment. Each nod of acknowledgement, each small gesture of solidarity spoke louder than any public reprimand. She inhaled deeply, as though drawing strength from their shared humanity. Miss Ellen returned to Liam's side, kneeling to meet his eye level. "You see," she whispered, "even when the world seems cold, kindness and truth will always find a way." She brushed his hair from his forehead, her touch as tender as a lullaby. "Your papa will be so proud." Liam nodded, eyes shining. He held out the folded scraps of drawing toward Ms. Ellen. She took them carefully and handed him a clean sheet of paper and a fresh set of crayons. "Let's make a whole new picture," she suggested, voice full of promise. He pressed the empty page to his chest, inhaling deeply, then began to trace the fragments, piece by piece, melding the old with the new. Each stroke of crayon felt like a small act of reclamation, a restoration of innocence in the wake of cruelty. As the plane began its slow descent toward Los Angeles, the cabin hummed with a quiet calm. Passengers watched the screens for landing instructions. Flight attendants prepared the cabin for arrival. Sandra, escorted gently to the back cabin, held the torn fragment at her heart, and in suite 1A, no, the business class seat that Liam now called his, he finished one final outline, a vibrant, unbroken airplane soaring above the clouds. He wrote beneath it, in bold letters, "Where kindness flies first." In that hush of shared understanding, the story found its true ending. Not in a roar of retribution, but in a collective breath of reconciliation, whispered among strangers who had all borne witness to a small child's dignity reclaimed. The captain's voice crackled gently over the intercom as Flight 4626 descended through streaks of pink and gold sky toward Los Angeles International Airport. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of SkyVista Airlines, we sincerely apologize for the distressing incident involving one of our youngest passengers today. Effective immediately, the flight attendant responsible has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Thank you for your patience and understanding." A hush fell over the cabin, an expectant, reverent quiet that felt different from earlier tension. Then, slowly, a ripple of appreciation spread through first class and business class alike. It began with a soft sigh from an elderly couple in row 1, then gathered strength. A middle-aged banker tapped her glass gently. Then a retired teacher in the next row joined in. Before long, a respectful round of applause echoed through the aisles, warm and deliberate, each clap a small beat in a chorus of solidarity. Liam sat forward, his little hands clasped so tightly around his platinum boarding pass that the edges dented his palms. He glanced at Miss Ellen Taylor, whose eyes glistened with relief and pride. Even the flight attendants paused in their tasks, smoothing pillows, arranging silverware, until the applause faded into a soft echo. It wasn't a raucous standing ovation. It was gentle, heartfelt, the kind of applause that carried meaning beyond celebration. It said, "We saw you, we understand, you are safe here." Liam's lips curved into a shy, triumphant smile. He pressed his cheek against Ms. Ellen's arm, drawing strength from her steady presence. In his 4-year-old mind, the world felt suddenly right again. The unfairness had been met with compassion, the childish innocence restored. He lifted his torn drawing, now carefully taped back together with Ms. Ellen's help, and looked at the vibrant airplane sketched beneath the words, "Where kindness flies first." A flight attendant stepped forward with a small plate of warm chocolate chip cookies, placing it gently on Liam's fold-out table. "Courtesy of Mr. Patel," she whispered, offering him a cookie with a soft smile. It tasted like triumph to him, sweet, warm, and wholly deserved. He took a careful bite, savoring the crumbly dough as Ms. Ellen ruffled his hair affectionately. The cabin lights dimmed slightly for the final approach, bathing every face in a soft glow. Outside the window, LA's twinkling sprawl stretched out beneath them, welcoming and familiar. Passengers turned back to their seats, a quiet buzz of satisfied murmurs passing between them, talk of how the airline handled the crisis, praise for a young boy's bravery, gratitude for a story that ended, not in anger but in dignity. Liam caught sight of Sandra Whitmore, led quietly down the aisle by ground staff in dark uniforms. She nodded once to the cabin, a humble acknowledgement of her mistake, and lingered at the curtain's edge just long enough to offer a small, contrite bow to the assembled passengers. Then she disappeared behind the curtain, her departure met with neither jeers nor cheers, only the respectful silence of a lesson well learned. Miss Ellen gathered Liam in her arms as the seatbelt sign clicked on. "You were so brave," she murmured, brushing a crumb from his cheek. He leaned into her, drawing all his courage and comfort into that shared moment. Outside, the runway lights rushed toward them, and the engine's hum rose to meet the landing gear's soft thump. When the wheels kissed the tarmac, a fresh round of applause rose up, quieter this time, but no less sincere. Liam squeezed Ms. Ellen's hand, feeling the gentle tremor of joy ripple through the cabin. He thought of his father, waiting beyond the jet bridge, ready to scoop him up and make everything better with a single smile. As the cabin door opened and the warm LA night air washed in, Liam stepped forward first, clutching his drawing and boarding pass like treasured badges of honor. Behind him, passengers filed out in respectful procession, many offering nods or soft well-dones as they passed. And in that moment, amid the hush of engines winding down and the soft chatter of grateful travelers, Liam learned the final lesson of his journey. That true justice doesn't roar. It resonates in the quiet applause of compassion, in the gentle gestures of understanding, and in the knowledge that kindness, once set free, will always find its way home. The sun was low over the Los Angeles skyline when Flight 4626 finally rolled to a stop at the gate. A small media contingent clustered just beyond the jet bridge, cameras, microphones, and a few well-placed reporters in pressed suits. As the cabin door swung open, Arjun Patel stepped forward, holding his son's hand in one strong grip and a slim folder in the other. Behind him, Ms. Ellen Taylor shepherded Liam close, her eyes bright with pride. On the tarmac, a neat row of young families waited with colorful welcome signs, each fluttering in the evening breeze. Children held hand-drawn pictures of airplanes, complete with puffy clouds and beaming sun faces. Some displayed rainbow arcs, others sketches of seatbelts and smiling flight attendants. All gifts for the CEO who'd just set a powerful precedent. Liam's gaze swept the crowd, and his grip tightened on Arjun's fingers. Even 4 years old, he understood that this moment was bigger than any one person. At the base of the stairs, a SkyVista PR manager, impeccably dressed in navy and silver, greeted them with a warm smile. "Mr. Patel, welcome back," she said, stepping aside to reveal a small podium draped in a white linen cloth embroidered with the SkyVista crest. Reporters rustled, notebooks at the ready. Arjun nodded, exchanged a quick smile with Liam, then straightened. Clearing his throat, he addressed the assembled crowd. "Good evening. Today's events were a powerful reminder that every passenger, especially our youngest, deserves respect and dignity. Effective immediately, SkyVista Airlines is launching a comprehensive child dignity class program." He lifted the folder to reveal glossy charts. "A new training curriculum for all cabin crew, mandatory by next quarter. A peer mentoring system for identifying and de-escalating potential conflicts, and a first-of-its-quick partnership with child advocates to ensure continuous oversight." Behind the microphones, Liam listened solemnly, gripping his father's pant leg. Arjun continued, "We will also offer transition support and professional development for any employee who wants to restore their career, provided they commit to completing this training." He paused, letting the promise hang in the air. "Because when a mistake is made, we must choose accountability over punishment." A ripple of approving nods passed through the audience. "Thank you," Arjun concluded, kneeling to meet Liam's eyes. "And thank you, young man, for reminding us why we fly in the first place." He scooped Liam into his arms, planting a soft kiss on his forehead. Cameras flashed, but the triumphant smile on Liam's face was the real headline. As the press moved in for sound bites, Ms. Ellen guided Liam and Arjun toward a waiting SUV. The little boy clutched his platinum boarding pass and the salvaged fragments of his drawing against his chest. The cookies they'd shared aboard the plane had long since disappeared, but the warmth of that simple kindness still lingered. Inside the vehicle's quiet embrace, Liam pressed his cheek against the window, watching the runway lights drift past. Arjun slid his hand down to rest on his son's knee. "You did everything right," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." Liam nodded, eyes heavy but hopeful. "Can we go home now?" he murmured. Arjun smiled. "Almost, buddy. First we fix your drawing." Back at home in Palo Alto, the early morning sun glinted off the high-tech glass facade of the Patel estate. Liam bounded down the marble staircase in his pajamas, clutching a fresh, uncreased sheet of art paper. Ms. Ellen set out a new box of crayons. Reds, blues, greens, and every color a child could dream of. On the coffee table lay the 2 torn fragments taped neatly together, crayon edges peeking through the clear lines of adhesive. Liam knelt before the paper, brow furrowed in concentration. He placed the repaired fragments down first, then traced their outlines in bold strokes. Piece by piece, he recreated the little wooden airplane that had meant so much on that fateful flight. When the basic shape was done, he filled the wings with chartreuse and the fuselage with pastel yellow. Beneath it, he carefully printed in thick letters, "Where kindness flies first." He leaned back to admire his work, then slid it across the table to Arjun, who'd stepped in to watch. Arjun's eyes glistened with emotion as he studied the drawing. "That's perfect," he said, voice thick with pride. He lifted Liam into his arms. "Thank you for reminding everyone what matters most." Mrs. Ellen, standing nearby, reached out to ruffle Liam's hair. "You've given the world a gift, sweetheart," she said, "and you've shown us all how to be brave." In the soft morning light, the three of them shared a quiet moment. Father, son, and guardian, bound by an experience that had tested them and emerged stronger for it. Later that day, SkyVista's new training modules launched company-wide, and social media lit up with stories of the incident and its peaceful resolution. Employee surveys showed a significant uptick in morale, and customer feedback praised the transparent, compassionate response. The Child Dignity class became a model for other airlines, a testament to one family's belief in the power of empathy. And in a small art room on campus, a group of elementary school students added their own drawings to a kindness wall, inspired by Liam's slogan. There were pictures of pilots helping children, flight attendants sharing smiles, and airplanes soaring beneath rainbows of goodwill. Through it all, Liam's simple phrase, "Where kindness flies first," became more than words on a page. It became a promise carried on every SkyVista flight, and a reminder that even the smallest voice can change the course of the sky.